speaking for the social sciences, is really an exercise in imagination. Because across the campus, there are about 450 faculty in 10 or 11 colleges and divisions and schools who are social scientists. And the diversity of the research that they do is massive. And yet, ethnographically, if you take a look at the common features and needs that you see across this massive landscape that brings in to, this is actually Chris Pachorek's statistical programming in our boot camp that was done last summer, inviting in statistics together with social scientists. You know, the breadth and depth of it is deep, and yet there are common features that ethnographically you can pull out if you try to survey this landscape, not just at the systematic, but also at the detailed level. And one of the things that stands out is there are, across a huge number of individual disciplines, ways in which all of the social sciences are taking on computing in ways that are new to them and challenging, and yet the trajectory, the path through learning how to do this work is often quite common. So we've been developing ways to map and bundle and meet the pent-up needs in this area. And we've figured out in D-Lab, here you see one of our workshops, that shared infrastructure has really been the way to go. That includes teaching and training for graduate students, postdocs, and faculty. That's this picture. And I'll admit we've had an uptake from D-Lab's training from every school and college across campus, even though we've only been taxing the social science deans for this. Though, of course, there is central campus contribution and VC research in the mix. There's consulting that's needed. Consulting is something that Research IT has in mind on research design and analysis. And there's improving ways for researchers to access data sets in appropriately secure environments without, of course, building them themselves, the cluster under the desk, which is ethnographically quite common across the social sciences here. And, of course, shared compute resources for general classes of needs. One of the great recognitions in D-Lab this year has been realizing that from the start, building these shared compute resources doesn't always mean building it ourselves. It can mean building the coalition. It can mean building the social relations that get the needs met, not necessarily inside your own organization, but at the right scale. So what are those needs for the social sciences as we've been scoping them out this year? We have a rough map. We need institutional cluster support. We need cloud, and that is increasingly obvious to especially the graduate students in the social science space. We need, don't ask what the dimensions and the mapping here is. I just wanted to indicate that one, it's large, and two, it's like very strangely configured. So we try to get our heads around what the needs are. There's needs for virtual workstations up and down the line. There's the need for consulting that wraps all the way around from the beginning to the end. And then I'll admit there's a little bit of classical HPC in there. For, at least at our present state of view, it's a small amount, but wouldn't it be interesting were it to grow? Now, this is the map of needs. If you map what reality is in terms of service provision, it's something like this. This is quite distressing. It's the sort of thing that, I mean, we do use a fair amount of profanity in D-Lab, and when I've brought the Research IT people over, they've listened to it and been quite patient and acknowledged that this is not satisfactory, that part of the gap between reality and need is what we need to work on. So I want to talk you through, just for the sheer pleasure of showing some of the diversity and curiosity of some of the use cases that we've surfaced this year. And some of the folks whose use cases this are, I think, are actually in the audience here. I hope they won't mind if I've made use of them. Lovely case on semi-automatic text analysis, working with historical newspaper reports in order to understand social structures that are enabling and standing behind them. Once the researcher here assembled the data that she had picked out of historical newspaper databases, she incrementally tried running the algorithm she had on ever more powerful hardware, where that meant, okay, not just on my laptop, which is the standard provisioning of research computing for social science graduate students, then to a server that we sort of bootlegged her access to. And then once that proved not to be enough compute, she was able to try it on consecutively larger instances, CPU and memory, in just a matter of hours, working with us in order for DLab to understand what that progression is through there. Now, this researcher is not really in big territory in terms that appeal across the rest of campus. But the standard algorithms that she was using assumed that all her data fit in memory. And that is one of the challenges of it's not just the amount of compute, it's the relationship to the analysis process. Another nice case from the social sciences, legalization, medicalization of cannabis. And actually, Cyrus is here right now. You know, you've got to love our cases. Where you're trying to analyze the effects of a particular moment in time of changes that are made in legal and social structures on data sets that can be collected, say, from Twitter or from web scraping. And so Cyrus has scraped a large amount of marijuana price data using algorithms that were developed by a team of CS undergrads that he works with in the URAP project. And so Cyrus needed a server that was connected to the internet, and he needed ample storage, but the compute needs are still relatively light. And yet the path to satisfying those needs was not obvious on this campus. The main concern here is that this should be relatively inexpensive, but it's hard for non-experts to find a relatively straightforward way to do it inexpensively. So that's the character of the use case here. And then finally, this reaches beyond quantitative analysis into qualitative data analysis, where we have a researcher, again, whose URAP project is needing a way for her team to use Windows-only software. And unfortunately, in qualitative data analysis, the offerings out there, until we build our own, are proprietary and, with one exception, Windows-based. How do you get a team of undergrads, many of whom are not interested in getting a Windows laptop, to do the work that your team is needing to get up? Also inside here is a hidden need for demand aggregation, because when this researcher is not using the software, others should be able to use it to do the same thing. It's a kind of virtualizing of the computer lab. And that is one of the places where we really welcome the push into virtual workstations. Now, these are all examples from graduate students. I'll actually admit it. And that doesn't mean that there are not distinctive faculty needs in this area. But I want to highlight that the social structure of the research domain really is important to understanding what needs need to get satisfied. So there are faculty PIs in the social sciences who run grant-based teams just like across the rest of campus. And in our part of the world, there are also even more distributed research and learning processes where graduate students are functioning as team leads supervising teams of undergraduates with rather less access to resources provided by faculty PI. And so the framing of faculty needs here is one that the social sciences welcome, but we also bring into view the cascading of that PI effect down into graduate students. So finally, one of the things that's been inviting through this process of working with research IT is their willingness to engage with the users and understand their contexts. I mean, I can say this as a social scientist. Research IT is socially and organizationally very smart in the ways that they have framed this program through interacting with the folks who are going to be using the services. And that is what gives me, as a social scientist, confidence for their future. Because, yeah, the technology is changing fast, but they have the organizational savvy to keep up because they're coupled into the researchers who are making use of the needs. So with that, I want to, again, as always, thank the folks who made this possible with such pleasure for, over the course of a year, making an incredible amount of headway. Thank you.